Watchers in the Fourth Dimension.
It appears he comes from a dying man.
At dawn tomorrow, the city will weep tears of blood.
Hello, God.
Hello and welcome back to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension. I'm Anthony.
I'm Don.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Reilly, and you'd be surprised what I've got in my wardrobe.
Oh my. Well, following up off of the back of that Dalek epic that took us 2 episodes to cover, we're off to the much more comfortable setting of 16th century France for a fun romp called the Massacre? Yeah, it's all about religious persecution. It might also possibly be called the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. They just can't decide the title on this one. Jumping straight into behind the scenes, this one was written by our old friend John Lucarotti, who had previously written both Marco Polo and The Aztecs, so that's quite the CV so far. However, the journey of this story from pen to screen was not an easy one. Previous story editor, our friend Dennis Spooner, had commissioned Lucarotti to write a story about Vikings landing in Newfoundland in 1000 AD. However, his successor, Donald Tosh, rejected that storyline, and Lucarotti, believing he'd been guaranteed a commission by Spooner, called his agents, complained, some nastiness happened, and Tosh eventually said, all right, we'll pay you for something, but you've got to do it about the Huguenot massacre. Lucarotti just kind of thought, shit. So he wrote the drafts, Tosh didn't like them, stepped in, very heavily rewrote them, and that was to the point where Lucarotti actually asked that his name was removed from the credits before changing his mind before it was broadcast. When we were doing Dalek's master plan, we mentioned that both Donald Tosh and producer John Wiles were on their way out, and Tosh was actually the first one of them to leave, with a new script editor, Jerry Davis, stepping in as story editor, allowing Tosh to be given a writing credit on episode 4. This would be his only ever writing credit on the show, although he returns to write a lost story for Big Finish entitled The Rose Mariners. Speaking of Jerry Davis, our new story editor, prior to coming to the show, he had written for long-running soap Coronation Street and a show I'd never heard of called 199 Park Lane, and he served as the story editor on the latter of those. He will stay with us on Doctor Who through the majority of Season 4 and will help ease the transition in lead actors when that comes about. A little bit of excitement around the director's chair. This was the debut of Paddy Russell, and she is the first woman to direct the show. She'll return 3 more times in the 1970s, and outside of Doctor Who, she had directed for shows such as Out of the Unknown, Z-Cars, The Omega Factor, and another long-running soap called Emmerdale. Julie, my apologies, but this is another story that does not have a credited composer. Yeah, sorry. In the designer seat, we have Michael Young, and this is his only ever contribution to the Doctor Who universe, and he works on a fair number of fairly diverse shows, including Adam Adamant Lives, Up Pompeii, which is a wonderful comedy set in ancient Roman times, and To Serve Them All My Days, which is kind of a period BBC drama.
What was that first one? Did you say Adam Ant Lives?
Adam Adamant.
Ah, okay. I thought it was some really interesting 80s show.
Sadly not. It's actually a very good 60s show that was created by Verity Lambert, so it's worth checking out, actually. Some people say that the lead character was the inspiration for the third Doctor. Anyway, that covers almost all of the behind-the-scenes information. However, one final item is that the production team did consider bringing one of the characters, Anne Chaplet, on as a permanent companion, before deciding that she would cause the exact same problems that Katerina caused. So they said, never mind, and we get the rather rushed ending with the introduction of Dodo, whom we'll talk about properly next episode. With that, we move on to our short summary, which this time is in the hands of Julie. Over to you.
In this story, we discover that Catherine de' Medici is trying to assert her family's power in France, not just Italy, and is scared about the marriage of Henry of Navarre. He is a Huguenot. Oh no! Which is the worst thing that could possibly ever happen. A lot of political maneuvering happens, and a massacre starts. Oh, wait, I think I forgot something. Oh, our TARDIS crew interact with people who don't matter, don't affect the plot at all, don't save anybody, and we end with a dodo on board. You're welcome.
Ooh, Julie, cutting. I like it. All right, let's talk about this story. Episode 1, War of God.
It shouldn't be War of God, it's War over God, and it's because people just can't seem to decide that they like each other, even though they think different things.
Yeah, it's almost like that's, not a problem we have these days.
Or, for all of the whole world. It's fine.
So I can immediately see why John Lucarotti didn't want to write this.
Yeah, I mean, what can you do? What can you do with this? What can you do with this story in history?
There's a lot of politics here that, frankly, through the entire story, I just found myself not caring about.
Yeah, it definitely gave a feel of, I feel like this inspired a young George Lucas for the prequels kind of feel.
Yeah, there is a lot of trade routes, and frankly, there is just too many characters. I mean, I almost wrote down this thing of just trying to map who was who and what they wanted.
And what side they were on.
Right, and it's really just, it's a fairly
care?
simple story about, hey, we're going to assassinate this person to cause problems and ensure our power, but it's told in such a way that I found it really frustrating.
Well, one, they didn't do a good job of setting up the backstory because, it is very simple. I was mentioning to the guys earlier, I listened to a series of podcasts about the Medici family, including this whole massacre. And that was more entertaining just from a straight up, hey, this is what happened in history versus this. So, yeah, they shouldn't have added just minor, servants, or and all these other individuals who it doesn't matter what they're doing. It's like, oh, I'm serving my lord. Well, why don't you just have the lord there? I don't need to see you. So it was just a lot of, we're not gonna, it would have been what they could have done is the doctor could have given like a little 2-minute spiel about what was going on in that era, and that would have fixed a lot of it.
But that would have required the doctor to actually do something in this story.
And to be on set, actually.
Yeah, here's the thing. You have the actor who is now double billed, and he's actually on screen about a quarter of the time that he would usually be. That makes no sense to me.
But the Doctor does have a wonderful new hat, which, is what really matters here.
Oh, never mind. 10 out of 10. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing I really will give this episode is just from the recon. I get the feeling it had a lot of great atmosphere. It sounded very tense, particularly this first episode. There's a real sense of fear in the characters that something bad is going to happen. I liked that about it.
I agree with that. I also, being the crazy person that I am, with the reconstruction, it had that opening artwork that was that famous painting of the massacre itself, which I, was looking into some of the details, and I was like, oh, well, there's Catherine de Medici on this painting. So I did like some of the details that they took with that. They
did actually use that print in the original episode to open it as well. So they tracked down the appropriate print and used it to give you something actually pretty accurate.
Even
That's
better.
Very cool.
Yeah. The other interesting thing I thought about this particular episode was seeing Stephen without the Doctor. He's so lost.
I guess maybe that's good for one episode of the serial, but that's basically the entire serial.
It is.
And it's kind of raises the question of, are we watching Doctor Who, or are we watching a spin-off of Doctor Who of this companion and no one else? Don't get me wrong, there have been episodes of Doctor Who without the Doctor in them, or barely in them, that are very, very good. But this was not one of those.
Well, what was weird about it was that it was basically Steven just being like, sure, I'll hang out with you guys. As opposed to Steven really trying to take initiative and, actually go find the Doctor or do anything. He was just like, oh, hey, thanks. I'm going to buds with you guys because you invited me and you're nice.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I mean, I like the idea of Steven getting his time to shine, because normally he's just there to be the muscle and sort of bounce off the other companion. But he doesn't really have any agency in this story. The only thing he wants is to find the Doctor and leave. But at least he didn't really get taken prisoner, and we didn't have to go through that trope, so that's something.
It's funny because the point you're bringing up there is that maybe they were attempting to try to do the mistaken man kind of plot device of North by Northwest, in which he's mistaken for somebody else, and he gets involved, and no one believes him that he's just some person passing through. I guess maybe they did try some sort of element of that, of him being confused to be a Catholic spy or on the other side, blah, 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 blah. It could have been better executed if he was, set up as looking like or having something that made him other people for certain believe that he was this person involved with the conspiracy. That would have been more interesting. Instead of this kind of light, tenuous thread between like, oh, he was over there talking to them. Oh, he must be a Catholic spy. And it just seems like everyone's so quick to immediately categorize someone off of like the flimsiest circumstance.
Well, I mean, you saw the angry crowd in episode 3, I think it was. So yeah, they're all pretty quick to jump to conclusions.
We do end this episode with what I think must have been a really great cliffhanger, and what I think is one of the main plot points of this episode is the abbot showing up, and it's William Hartnell. So much of what comes next hinges around, well, is it the Doctor, or is he just someone who looks like the Doctor?
Dr. Doppelganger.
Yeah, I mean, that's decent.
It would have made more sense if their personalities were a little bit more similar, because yes, at the cliffhanger, I was even thinking, oh, that could be the Doctor. But then when you actually interact with him, I'm like, there's no way.
So I think that takes us into episode 2, the Sea Beggar. Good transition, Julie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I want to start this with reading a couple of my notes. I think I've got a good selection here of all the politics in this, not entertaining. Are the English planning on helping the Huguenots? Who cares? Tell him the Sea Beggar dies tomorrow. Who is he and why do we care?
Yeah. Well, and you just sit there and it's like, will England help? Well, Elizabeth is the Queen of England, and her country already went through a whole bunch of everyone is going to die because they're Catholic. Everyone's going to die because they're Protestant. I don't think she really wants to get involved in yet another religious dispute. Think she's done with that.
Oh,
and who cares?
Final one. Alliance with the Dutch against the Spanish? Again, why do we care?
Well, then on top of that, I mean, that's the macro, like what's going on in the, at this setting. But also, like, at a more micro level in the plot, it's literally just Stephen, like, trying to get directions to Port Saint Martin. And, like, basically, and just, I'm lost. I'm trying to find my dad. Where's my dad? He's just basically a kid at a shopping, in a grocery store. I mean, that's literally all there is.
So this is just another version of Home Alone, basically. Is that what you're saying?
I think the crux of my problem here is, I mean, I realize I'm coming across as having a very English view of history. It's not that I don't care about this. It's the fact that the story does nothing to tell me why I should care.
Yeah. I will completely agree. I mean, I found myself caring about nitpicky things like the subplot of Preslin's shop, where the Doctor goes there, immediately finds him, and they wind up getting along great. And then they both just disappear. By the time that Stephen finally gets there, some lady tells him, oh, this place has been boarded up and abandoned for 2 years. Really?
Yeah, so you're just left thinking, well, who the hell did the Doctor meet?
Right! It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. Well, and also the interesting, like, for me, since I knew a little bit about, like, some of the history behind it, what they needed to do is they needed to pick one of the historical figures and stick with them, because it's like, I actually think if you had actually taken Henry of Navarre and focused on him, because this is an interesting story, because he ends up becoming the King of France. And so then you could have played off of that in some degree. He just got married, so there's some, stuff around that. So at least that would give you, like, a person to cling to. But they were just like, well, we have, Gaston and Nicholas, and, they're kind of, they're Henry's, like, guards, I guess. I don't know how they're related to him at all. But yeah, they're interesting. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're like, well, I agree with Henry. Well, I don't agree with Henry. Well, then get Henry on screen.
And it all falls back to the central issue, like what Anthony was saying, is why do we care? There needs to be some sort of stake set out. I mean, even in the 1960s when this episode came out, what year was this, Anthony? 1963, 64 now?
66.
66. God, we're going fast. But at that time, viewers at that time would need to know, like, okay, why does this historical event matter? And if it doesn't matter in a large global sense, or a sense that maybe we're not aware of, how does it matter on a character sense? But we have too many characters and no characters for us to care about. And the two characters that we do care about, one of them just want to do a tourist trip, and the other one wants to just leave.
That's it. There's no ticking clock. Neither one of them know that they're in any danger. The doctor doesn't realize that it's about to be the massacre until the last episode?
Yes.
And Steven has no idea. He's just bumming around with his friends trying to find the doctor. So there's no real drama there.
Why I pick on Henry of Navarre is because when he ends up becoming the King of France, he starts the Bourbon line, I believe. So in the grand scheme of things, it is very important that this massacre occurred, because he could have very well died in it. He actually had to get, and again, this is because I have a whole bunch of knowledge about this. And so if they played off of that and they were like, oh man, if he hadn't have survived this, we wouldn't have had, a whole bunch of reigning monarchs of France, and France would have been drastically different. But they didn't do that.
No, they did not.
I want to rewrite this whole serial.
I mean, I really think that the fundamental problem here is we have a script that was written by one guy who didn't want to write the script, that was then completely rewritten by someone else. It's just a bit of a mess across the board.
But then when they novelized it, he went back to his original script.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Now, the weird thing is, except for one review I found online, we're in the minority on this.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Yes, this has the reputation of a true lost classic.
Oh, wow.
So what I'm finding fascinating here is all four of us watched this completely independently. We've barely exchanged any notes on this up until we got on this session today, and none of us particularly liked this. I
was honestly expecting this to be another instance where everyone else talks about how great and Shakespearean it is, and me just sort of sitting here going, I didn't enjoy it. And that's, no. I think there's some quality in here. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. There's some decent writing. There's some good lines, but I don't care about any of the characters or about what happens. And I just found myself mainly trying to figure out, who is this person? How does this relate? Why do I care?
I think the one character we're meant to very much care about is Anne.
Yes.
Who we get introduced to towards the end of episode 2.
And then gets tossed away in episode 4.
Yeah, so it's almost like with her and Steven, it seems like it's love at first sight between them. Or was that just me picking up on that?
I didn't get that at all.
No.
Okay, I was shipping them. Pretty hard.
I mean, you do you, man. That's fine.
I think Steven, and actually, I was about to say this jokingly, but now I'm seeing this, and I think it's quite true. I think Steven is just feeling very sensitive about, running into another young woman and seeing her possibly, get killed. Basically.
Yeah.
And I think he's just got the memories of before, and so he's just, very sensitive about that. That's my read of it.
That's true.
See, nothing can ship like Ian and Barbara, so I can't.
That's true.
Yet.
Yeah. Well, that pretty much takes us into episode 3, Priest of Death. We are back to our heavy metal song title episode titles.
We really are. Sea Beggar is kind of lame, but Priest of Death and even Bell of Doom is all right. So
War of God.
War of God's good too. That's one of the strongest parts of the serial is just the titles.
I mean, these all sound like Black Sabbath tracks.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie. Also, episode 3 does bring in another fantastic hat, which Steven uses as a disguise. Yes. This is the year of the hats. We had the Doctor's fantastic hat in the latter half of the Daleks' master plan. We've got the Doctor with another hat here, Steven wearing a hat as a disguise. I'm loving the hat action.
They know me. Hats are amazing.
On the downside, we get more politics.
More politics. I do like the costumes from the pictures and the stills. I'm like, all right, costumes are a win. Sorry, I'm just going by what I like. I'm not the plot.
There was the weird how they basically Photoshop people's heads onto certain bodies.
And the reconstruction, yeah, that was enjoyable.
Because we don't have any telesnaps. Because, I mean, while I'm not a proctologist, so I can't speak as to exactly where John Wiles' head was when he decided not to do that, I do have my suspicions. And now we suffer for it because we don't get a better reconstruction.
So, again, it was mentioned earlier, someone said that there are quite a few lines that are pretty good in this, and I liked one of them that it's like, kings are only recognized by the power they yield. I was like, all right,
yeah,
that's a pretty good solid line. All right.
Yeah. With the performance of Hartnell as the abbot, I mean, I mentioned earlier, it seems like a lot of the plot really hinges on Stephen not knowing whether or not he's the doctor or the abbot, or, you know, the doctor pretending to be the abbot. As the audience, he plays it so differently, I think. I don't see how, as the viewer, anyone could be confused on that.
I agree. So you've either got, depending on how you interpret it, you could possibly have the doctor not letting Stephen in on his plan in any way, or what actually happened, the doctor just disappearing for days.
Yeah, I would love to know what he got up to in this time.
Yeah, he makes like no real mention of it's just like, I'm back. Hi. Like,
you know, and it's interesting because this is also, it was not as, you know, like clear and blatant as it is here, but remember in Dalek's master plan, when they're about to go back in, he like disappears, then just shows up right at the end, if you remember correctly.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's just like, once again, he has this time like, well, I was just away. And this is the part where the doctor and Dalek's master plan, like, they're about to go back into the base where the Daleks are. And yeah, is this something, I don't remember this happening with the doctor and my first doctor reviewing of him just disappearing and literally giving no explanation of where he went or what he was doing.
That's because you've never done the missing episodes before.
Ah.
No, I mean, as far as I recall, and it's been a while since I've done these, I think this is where that stops, which, you know, coincidentally is pretty much the end of Tosh and Wiles' tenure on the show. So I am left wondering whether a lot of this was partly down to the tension between them. One of you mentioned earlier how Hartnell was only basically in a quarter of this story, even though he was technically in all episodes as two different roles. Mm-hmm. Well, this was when Wiles was still trying to figure out whether he could sack him and have him leave the show. Worst. So they were deliberately trying to reduce his time. Yeah.
Wiles is the worst.
Well, not much longer.
Yeah.
Oh no, he will always be the worst.
I mean, we don't have to deal with him for much longer.
So what's really unfortunate about this episode is that it has an amazing title, but there's literally not much to talk about. It's a lot of politics. It's Stephen trying to, you know, figure out with the Abbott thing and all that. Catherine de Medici actually talks about some things and, you know, wields her power as she should.
Yeah, I was concerned about that because in the previous scene with her, she said absolutely nothing. I'm like, are we going to go through this entire thing where she doesn't even have one line? So that was pleasant to see them, like, you know, have her say something.
Yep. And then, you know, in the end, the Abbott dies. Like, there's not much plot-wise that happens in this episode, even though it has a great title.
Yeah, we do get that wonderful baying mob at the end.
Yeah.
I would really love to see how that looked. I think, you know, we keep talking about how there are some flashes of things that were very, very good here, but it's just flashes, and I think that's one of those moments. And, you know, knowing which stories Paddy Russell will come back to direct in the 70s, I suspect that was done very, very well. Okay. Bell of Doom.
So we finally mentioned that it's close to St. Bartholomew's Day.
Yes, when the Doctor shows up and realizes what's going on.
Oh my god.
This is the kind of stuff he should really ask in episode 1.
Yeah.
At which point he would go, oh crap, we must leave.
Yeah, because from what I can recall, they knew that Henry of Navarre had just gotten married. It's pretty well known that it was very shortly after that's when the massacres happened. So it's like, should have been able to pick up on that a little bit sooner.
It is great when he shows up again.
Well,
I mean, I've missed him.
Oh, absolutely. But did anyone else like feel the same amount of like rage and anger that Stephen felt in that scene? Like, basically him saying, "Where the hell have you been?" And then the doctor just dismissively just like brush him off like, "Oh, I was unavoidably delayed. Never mind that now." Yeah. I'm like, no, very much mind that now. You're the guy telling me, like, don't do anything. Don't go out there. Don't do this. Don't do that. And he's like, I tried to follow all your rules and you just were gone. Oy, oy.
Yeah, it said, you should have stayed at the tavern. He's like, I couldn't. I had to leave. They closed.
It's like, I stayed as long as I could.
The doctor's a bad friend. I'm just going to say this.
Particularly in this story.
Yes. Yeah.
So he never says what he was doing. Stephen still doesn't know whether or not he was the abbot. I mean...
This episode would have been a lot better if they just tried to go for farce. And like with all the characters asking questions like, and no one knows who the abbot is or who the sea beggar is the entire time. Everyone's just asking the other person and they act like they know, but they really don't know. I feel like that would have been really enjoyable.
That actually reminds me of something, because they almost did something interesting, because they were sort of laying these hints that the abbot wasn't what he seemed. There was a character going, "Oh, have you met him before?" "Oh, I just met him for the first time the other day." And it really seemed to be sort of pushing the audience to thinking there was really something up with him, that he might actually be the doctor. But the whole plot thread just made no sense. It just kind of fell apart.
And again, I think so much of this is at the feet of Donald Tosh and his rewrites. From what I've read, the script that John Lucarotti originally delivered had Hartnell very heavily actually doing the dual roles at the same time. And Tosh's rewrites had effectively wrote the Doctor out so that Hartnell would either be playing the Doctor or the Abbot, but not both at the same time.
Oh, that would have been so great at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that would have been fun.
Yeah,
I love those type of things.
But instead, he barely plays either of them.
Yeah.
The one thing that I was able to grasp in all of this is, so, Catherine de Medici actually is like, all right, start this whole crazy nonsense. And then Simon, who is one of the few characters that I caught the name of, who has wanted to have Navarre dead, and I think the other guy dead as well. He's wanted to kill everybody. Is given the task with having actually to save Henry, and it's like, haha, sucks to be you.
He's a bloodthirsty bastard, isn't he?
He really is. So that little part just made me really happy, because I was like, ha ha ha, you were the reason why he then became king, like, a couple of years later. Fine.
We keep talking about the flashes of brilliance here, and there's one line from the final episode before we leave Paris that I loved, which was, "This city will weep tears of blood."
Oh, that's good.
I was like, yeah, that's very metal.
Very much so.
I think that's as much as we can stand a historical bit. But then we
Let's get to the best part of the entire episode.
Let's get to the part I actually enjoyed considerably, which is, Stephen just telling the Doctor off, and well-deservedly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, this is like all of a sudden is like watching this episode, watching all this, the entire serial, each episode, like you start off, you're like giving it a shot, and then you feel yourself just kind of like falling down and just kind of just falling back. And then when this happens, all of a sudden you just immediately feel energized and perked up, like, oh, okay, here we go. Here's the episode. It's like finally started now.
Very much so. Very, very much so.
I mean, it's just amazing how much this part right here like grabbed my attention so much, and I was like, okay, I'm in.
There's that. There is, then the reactions of, Stephen threatening to leave, actually leaving the TARDIS, and then, the Doctor trying to justify a few things, saying like, don't try to judge history from where you stand, and the, I dare not change this, but then he's second guessing himself because he's like, they're all gone.
Yeah, he really sounds like he's trying to convince himself when he said, I was right to do what I did. And it's like, you don't really sound like you believe it, though.
Well, he has him doubting himself so much, he even thinks briefly about going home. before realizing he can't even do that. I think this is made even more poignant by the fact that this is effectively the fourth story in the row, if you think of Mission to the Unknown as the Doctor failing simply by the fact that he didn't show up, where the Doctor has failed.
Yeah, this is a real feel-good season.
Yeah. Mission to the Unknown, he doesn't show up. Mythmakers, half the characters die. Dalek's Master Plan, almost everyone dies. And here, almost everyone dies. It's failure after failure after failure. And in that monologue, he knows it. And he is close to giving up. It's brilliant.
Oh, yeah. It's absolutely, that is the best. This is the best part.
There's that, and not only all the deaths, but also just like the number of companions has just gotten lower and lower until at some such point that he's alone. And, you know, like we've only seen this where he's always been with someone. He's either always been with Susan or he's had multiple other companions. And now all of a sudden he's like, oh, it's been years. I haven't been alone in years.
And also, let's be very clear, out of all the companions, I mean, it's out of all the ones that have come before, I would argue that he's had the least amount of a positive relationship with Steven compared to, I mean, everyone else he's been so much closer with, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Steven hasn't really been
like
developed as an individual character too much.
Yeah. He feels more like a fare in the Doctor's taxi than like an actual, like, true friend or companion. He's just a guy that's happens to be stuck along for the ride.
Well, I mean, Ian was that for quite a while.
But there was a playful, like, one-upmanship between the two of them, and kind of each of them needling each other. But, like, you know, Steven and the Doctor don't really have that. They just have this, it only just, there's nothing, and then all of a sudden there's just this big fight right now that happens, and then he's back, so.
I mean, by this stage, they have, to be fair, been through a lot. Everything that went down in Dalek's Master Plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like Ian, Barbara, Susan, even Vicky, with the exception of the Mythmakers, didn't see people just dying repeatedly. And that's what Steven and the Doctor have been through together. And Steven is at a point where he is fed up with the Doctor not being able to do anything. And himself not being able to do anything.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So then, someone just randomly barges into the TARDIS.
I have to say that's one of my favorite devices for introducing a companion is the sudden, just like abrupt, just entry into onto the scene. No, I really do. I like that. I like that just sudden surprise.
I found it kind of forced. I was like, really? You just show up?
I think.
And your name is Dodo.
Maybe, I think it's more like just because after all of what we've just talked about, all these dark episodes, it's fun to have something playful and a light, airy presence just suddenly just popping up out of nowhere. It just seems a lot more optimistic than what we've been dealing with. So I found it refreshing. It
feels so abrupt and out of place, and Dodo has just wandered into the TARDIS, takes everything in her stride. I realize I'm talking about a show in which a man from another world travels from planet to planet in a magical box that is bigger on the inside than the outside. But her reactions to entering the TARDIS just don't seem realistic.
I agree. It seemed really forced and tacked on. And yes, her name bothers me.
One of the later original novels, attempts to explain why she is so nonchalant about the whole thing, and this was a book called Salvation by Steve Lyons, and what it basically says, I'm not saying this is a good explanation, but this is how Steve Lyons tries to explain this away. He basically implies that Dodo had just got away from an attempted rape.
Oh, wow.
And she was in shock.
Wow, what a crutch. What a crutch. Jeez.
One that doesn't make sense with what she was saying, because she said that someone had gotten hurt.
Oh, boy.
And she was running into the police box. So I don't like that.
Oh, it's nonsense.
Yeah. For me, the big thing is that since I don't know her yet, it could be that that's just how she is. That she is just goes with the flow type of person. So I could believe that there is a certain subset of people who would just barge in and be like, well, this is weird. All right, cool. I just don't know if she's that person.
Right. Or if not that, I mean, you don't have to be just like a roll with the punches type of person. She could be a person that, like, walks in there, is immediately just like stunned and petrified about like, wow, this is really weird. But she doesn't want to show it. She wants to keep it all within because she doesn't want people to see, she wants to, keep her poker face on. And therefore she's acting like, oh, whatever, no big deal. I don't know, I'm like I said, I'm waiting to know more about her and see more about her before saying that this was a bad intro.
Here's the thing, right? So you think about the English and the stereotype of stiff upper lip and, well, this is all terribly nice, isn't it, old chap? Well, that's not what this is, because she's just running her mouth. Like, she's clearly...
It reminds me of Donna. Like, when Donna shows up in the TARDIS, she's like, what? What? How dare you? And so it just reminded me a little bit like that, because obviously Donna was a little bit more over the top about it, and a little bit more angry. I mean, she was supposed to be at her wedding, so I get that. Her in her wedding dress. But, so I think I kind of took it a little bit like that.
That's fair.
And I love Donna, so.
Yeah, we'll see if you love Dodo after the next few stories.
I might not. And again, the name. The name is rough. Name.
I would like to bring up. I was studying this scene in particular because it was the one, like I said, that like really just perked my ears up and made me really want to pay attention. And did anyone else feel like that the Doctor didn't accidentally forget that she was on the TARDIS when he took off?
Oh no, he's a kidnapper.
Pretty much he straight up kidnapped her. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's okay. It's not out of his realm of possibility. He kidnaps people. It's what he does.
and this was because he felt like she looked like Susan.
Yes.
Which, aside from maybe the hair, I'm not sure I see.
And that is not a serial killer thing to do at all. Okay, just get that out of your mind.
Yeah, this wasn't shoehorned in at all.
And we need to wrap it up with the whole like what's her last name? What was Anne's last name?
Oh, Chaplet. Oh, well, that makes everything okay. Maybe she survived and had descendants, even though Yeah,
that's
part,
not how names generally work. Yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure that the mother's name would have survived in the very patriarchal society of 16th century France. And Stephen comes back.
For no adequately explored reason.
Because the police are on their way. Come on, Doctor, we have to go. What?
I mean, you would think after all the things they've had to like attack them and fight them, they're worried about 2 British police officers in 1966.
Yeah, no.
If I had been Stephen, I would have been like, oh, hey, back in England in the 60s, I'm going to go find Ian and Barbara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Oh, speaking of Ian and Barbara, there is in the Doctor Who Companions book, Doctor Who Companions by David J. Howell, William Russell and Jacqueline Hill were supposed to reprise their roles as Ian and Barbara as a cameo appearance.
Yes, they were.
And that didn't happen. But I thought that would have been nice. But
that would have been really cute.
Yes, it would have been wonderful.
So, yes, metrics. Any nominations for the camp count?
No.
Simon.
No.
Simon.
I don't know. This whole thing seemed very uncamp and unfun.
I don't know. Simon had like a classic, like kind of villainous voice with like, I don't know. I just thought the way he like, spoke was just kind of like over the top. But
I'm actually going to nominate the King for his little hissy fit as well. It was quite a magnificent tantrum. I'm
going to agree with Don, though. It just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go with 0 on the camp count. And the newly introduced I'll explain later count.
Nothing, because the Doctor couldn't be bothered to explain it all.
And didn't even give the courtesy of I'll explain later.
No F's given.
Oy vey. All right. so let's score the episode. Julie, you get to start first this time.
I had the luck of listening to a podcast beforehand, so I actually at least understood the politics that was happening. So step up one for me, but the story did a very poor job of it. I did like some of the lines that were done. From what I could tell from the stills and everything, and what other pictures they had, I felt that the costuming was done well and things of that nature. Especially if I'm looking at stuff from this season, it's no Galaxy. Was Galaxy 4 this season? I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, Galaxy 4 was the season opener.
Yeah, so it's not like that. So I am going to give it 5 Medicis out of 10.
Hey, Reilly.
Let's start positive. I'm sure that from what I could see, the costumes looked great. I like the fact that they tackled a very dark moment in history, and they gave it like a proper respect, unlike the burning of Rome, where the Doctor was getting all excited like a pyromaniac. So it's good that it had some sort of like somber tone to it in that regard, and I enjoyed that. But everything else, like the journey to get there, was just convoluted, confused, no stakes. Like we mentioned before, too many characters. It's just a mess. But instead of just slagging it more, I'm just going to go ahead and me and Anthony earlier discussed about how this serial was basically a Stephen story instead of a Doctor story. It was like a spinoff. So here are my 2 options for the different titles for the serial. It's Stephen and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Massacre, or a Stephen Taylor in St. Bartholomew's Court. Those are the 2 that I came up with. So anyway, end of the day, not that great. If you're going along and following through these serials, seriously, like just watch the first episode of this one and then like the last half of the last one, just to know and understand what's happening with the companion switch, or the companion edition, I mean. So I'll give it 3 sea beggars out of 10.
All right, so I'm up next, and I mean we've all talked about how it's difficult to care about the politics of this, even if you're familiar with it. The writing doesn't pull you in here, in my opinion. There are some great things going for this. Some of the dialogue is snappy, and then there's that ending. And I would love to see Hartnell's dual performance. I really would, but that's not really enough to rescue it for me. On top of this, the really interesting thing about doing this the way we have been doing it is watching everything in order. And to the point I made earlier, everyone dies in Mission to the Unknown. Half of the cast die in The Mythmakers. Almost everyone dies in Dalek's Master Plan, and the majority of the characters die in this. This used to be a fun adventure show. I look back at season 2, and it was so enjoyable. And this has just become so relentlessly grim, and I'm left in a position of, I just want the show I loved back. I really do. And I'm struggling at this point, and those who know me know that this is a show that has been my passion since I was about 5 years old. And watching this in order, this is really not enjoyable at this point. If it weren't for the last 10 minutes of the final episode, I think I would give this a 4 out of 10. But that last 10 minutes just about drags it up to 4.5 Bells of Doom out of 10. Don.
That was very eloquent, and I'm not sure if I can follow that up, but I'm going to try. This serial, to me, felt like a lot of lost opportunities. There was a really great chance to have the Doctor in a dual role where it wasn't a robot or a clone, and it was squandered. We had a good chance to really get to know Stephen, and I felt they kind of squandered that too, because he wasn't really doing anything except trying to leave. I felt they had a good opportunity to introduce a new companion, and I think Anne would have been a good choice, because, I mean, really, considering how outlandish the premise of the show is, you can have someone from the past sort of catching up if they're smart enough. It would be fine. Instead, we get someone crashing in for no reason at the last minute. I'm really glad Reilly enjoyed that. I wish I felt that way about it. But to me, it just seemed really like a bad solution to a problem they had created for themselves. That said, there was some good acting. There was some snappy lines. So I'm going to give it 4 failed assassinations out of 10.
Well, that gives us an average of basically just over 4 for this episode. We'll call it 4.1 with rounding, which doesn't quite make it the worst of the season on our averages. That honor still goes to Galaxy 4, but this is not done well, and we are definitely very much in a different opinion to the majority of fandom. I will say that one of the chaps at the Flight Through Entirety podcast feels exactly the same, and I think he would actually go as far as say that this is the worst story of the 60s, if I remember correctly. So,
I think I enjoyed Galaxy 4 much more than this. It was kind of dumb, but it was fun in places. This, I struggled.
If I told you actually scored this higher than Galaxy 4, do you want to revise your score?
Remember when the scoring didn't actually matter?
Yeah. Okay, we'll keep it at that. Yeah, so this was definitely a struggle. Quick question before we wrap up. If a magical genie appeared before you and said, you have your choice of missing story that you can return of the ones we've done so far, and I mean completely missing, so that would be Marco Polo, Mission to the Unknown, the Mythmakers, and the Massacre, so no existing episodes. Which one would you pick to be returned?
Mythmakers.
Marco Polo.
Oh, okay.
Either Mythmakers or Marco Polo.
I'm with Mythmakers, so not the Massacre.
No.
Point proven.
No. I just want to see the costuming and that sandstorm from Marco Polo.
God, that feels like so long ago. Because it was.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion on the Massacre. We'll be back next time covering an exciting story about Dodo catching a cold. In the meantime, all of our previous episodes are available on your favorite podcasting app. You can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Watchers4D. And as a reminder, you can email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and have a good one. You have been listening to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension with Don Smith, Reilly Streck, Julie Philippek, and myself, Anthony Williams. This episode, I'm not a proctologist, but was recorded on Thursday, the 5th of December, 2019. We're so depressed at the end of this story. There's nothing witty to be said. Go on, go home, nothing to see.